Everybody, and welcome back to INTR 101, College Success Strategies. Today, we're going to be talking about time management. So we'll go over some different methods of time management and how to make it work best for you. So as always, a terrible meme, my main form of time management for a lot of my undergraduate career was just writing things down on tiny slips of paper and hoping that I didn't lose them, which is a form of time management. But it wasn't a very organized form, and it often meant that I lost things or forgot about important dates and deadlines. So what we're going to do is go over some methods that will hopefully work well in your life that you can adapt and use for yourself. So first off, I just want to talk about it. What sort of time management methods do you use currently? So just take a second, think about it. You may think that time management is all about agendas and calendars, and while those are valid forms, things like to-do lists and just writing things down on slips of paper is also a valid form of time management. So let's break it down a little bit. How do we make our time management effective? Well, first of all, we're going to identify our priorities. We're going to make sure that whatever scheduling form we use, it's visible. We're going to create some action plans, which you'll remember from goal setting. We're going to get organized, and then we're going to breathe, because it's always important to breathe. So when it comes to identifying priorities, we want to think about the things that are going to go into our schedule. Some key things to include are classes, study time, meals, work, sleep, and breaks. Now, when I meet with students, they often remember classes, study time, and work, but tend to forget meals, sleep, and breaks. And that downtime, that time when you're not working on your academics, is just as important as the time that you are studying. So you want to make that a priority for yourself and make sure it's included in your schedule. So when we're building our schedule out, we're going to start with things that have set times that we can't change. So classes and work are examples. And the reason we do this is because it gives us some good scaffolding, some good structure to see where we have gaps in our schedule for other things. Then we're going to add in some study times. And I'll mention this a few times, but keep those between an hour to an hour and a half. And the reason is our ability to focus really well starts to kind of diminish after about an hour or an hour and a half. So we're going to set ourselves up for success by only holding ourselves to that amount of time. And then again, don't forget meals, breaks, and other activities. Those are all really critical things for having a well-rounded life. So you want to make sure they're included when you're thinking about your day. So what we're going to do is go through an example of this. So I have a weekly schedule here, and the first thing I'm doing is plugging in my class times. Like I said before, they have set times, they're not going to change. Next, I'm going to plug in when I work. Maybe you have a really consistent work schedule that never changes. Maybe it changes every week or every 2 weeks. Whatever it is, plug that in so again, you know where you have openings in your schedule. Now I'm going to add in some homework and study time. Now, there's a lot of these blocks, but they're only an hour long. And if it looks a little overwhelming, what I did was base this on, like how much time I was spending on average studying for my classes my junior year. Now, normally it was scattered all throughout my day and not really consistent, but this is about the time that I was spending. So it kind of equals out that way. Some of you may be doing all of this time already, but condensing it into longer blocks of time, and that's fine. Next, I'm going to include some time to sleep. Now, you may feel like a little bit of a toddler, but trust me, give yourself a bedtime. If you screw up your sleep schedule now in college, it takes a really long time to get back on track with it. So try and hold yourself to a kind of consistent time when you want to wind down and start to go to sleep. I realize that there are going to be days when you have to pull an all-nighter, and that's okay, so long as you aren't doing it super frequently. So try to get to bed, before 1 a.m. If you're trying to work to a normal bedtime, start slowly, increase or push it back an hour or half hour every time until you get to a time when you're really feeling good about it. Next is meals. So I'm not going to tell you what to eat, when to eat, or how to eat, but you need to eat. Our bodies need energy, so make sure you're plugging in some time for yourself to get some food. Now, it doesn't have to be consistent, but you can also treat this as a time to take a break or to call a friend, or if you're, in a living situation where you have roommates, to sit down with those roommates and just find a little bit of community there. Next, breaks are really, really important. So we want to make sure that we include them into our schedule. Now, the other great thing about scheduling out your breaks is that if you ever feel kind of guilty for taking a break because, wow, I really should be working on something, if it's actually scheduled out, it can help alleviate a little bit of that guilt. And the reason is you can look at your schedule and see like, oh yeah, I can totally relax for half an hour because I've got study time planned later, so I'm not going to fall behind. So if you ever deal with some of that like guilt around taking breaks, just try scheduling them and see if that helps. Now, this schedule is pretty packed, right? I planned out every single hour of the day. It's all like jam-packed full of things. Personally, it's a little bit overwhelming for me, and some of you might feel the same way. So here's another method of how to schedule. If you're feeling overwhelmed about scheduling for every hour, that's totally fine. You just need to include as much detail as is useful and needed for yourself. So this version of a schedule is much closer to what I actually did as a student later. And that's, I put in my class times because again, I wanted that little bit of a reminder and to see just when I had blocks of time. I put in my work schedule because I needed that for myself. And then I just put in a couple of study times. And the reason I'm doing that is so that I have some space in my week, every week that's consistent that I block out to make sure I stay on top of things. Obviously, I'm spending more time than that actually studying, but it's more scattered throughout the day wherever I have some of those gaps. And then I plug in some times to eat food. I had a consistent like friend dinner evening. And so I had all of those plugged in. So once again, just consider, what it is that works best for your life and your situation. So I work with a lot of students who the thought of scheduling out every hour is terrible. So try this out if that's kind of where you land. Another option is to do something that I call reverse contouring schedule, where it's like you leave gaps in your schedule where you don't schedule anything during times that you feel most productive. That way, if motivation strikes, you don't have anything scheduled over that time and you can work through it and get a lot done. So there's a lot of different options. Now we're going to take a second to talk about schedule building for an online schedule. So online courses can provide a lot of scheduling freedom, and that's amazing. However, it's important to give yourself some structure, and building your own structure can help with motivation and keep you on top of your work. So this is especially true for asynchronous classes or classes that don't meet at a consistent time. It's really common to push all of the work off until like the very end of the week, and then you've got a ton to do all in one go. So kind of building a little bit of time in for yourself can help mitigate that. One important thing is remember to be specific. So say exactly what you plan on doing during the time that you block out for yourself. So we're going to go through an example of that. First, I'm going to plug in all of my classes that still have consistent synchronous times to meet. So you may have a mixed schedule of partially online, partially in person, high flex, all of these different things. So I'm going to start with those set time lectures to give myself that like base. Next, I'm going to put time in for all of my classes that are asynchronous. And I'm going to be specific. I'm going to say that I'm going to watch recorded lectures on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and I'm going to take notes on slides Tuesday, Thursday. And the reason to do this is that you want to treat those asynchronous classes like a normal class. You want to get into a routine of setting some time aside from them that's consistent from week to week. And building that routine will help you stay on top of all of the material. Then, just like before, I'm plugging in some homework and study time, keeping those blocks between an hour and an hour and a half. Now, I didn't add in everything else for this schedule. I just wanted to give you a sense of some of the important notes for it. But one thing that you'll notice is that I did leave a lot of gaps, so I didn't do quite as much homework and studying as the first example. And part of that is that I wanted to be flexible. So when it comes to asynchronous classes, or like asynchronous online classes, you want to provide some wiggle room, right? One week might take you more time than the next week. So making sure that you leave a little bit of a buffer on either side of the time that you have dedicated for it can help with that. Additionally, you might have weeks that have a lot of projects and lots of different classes. So leaving some flexibility there can help make sure that you stay on top of all of those different projects. Now, we've gone through a couple of examples, and all of this leads to one thing, which is you want to make your schedule visible. So it's really important to do that because actually recording what you need to do can help motivate you to do it. And there's lots of different methods, right? You can use a paper planner, your phone, organizational apps, whatever it is that's going to remind you the best. I think what tends to happen is we get in this kind of rut where everyone thinks that like a paper agenda is the best like standard, it's what you have to do. So you buy one and you use it for about 3 weeks and then you don't use it again. And you do it again next year and next year and next year. So it might just be that a paper planner doesn't work for you, and that's totally fine. I personally prefer to use my Outlook calendar for everything scheduling related to work. And when I'm at home, I just use alarms and calendar reminders on my phone. So, finding that method that works well is what's really important here. And you can get some organizational apps that sort of gamify the process, where it's like you get a special prize every time you complete something, or you're able to see kind of like your stats of how you're doing with staying on top of stuff. And that can be a really big motivational help for a lot of people. So what we're going to talk about next is finding the scale that works, right? So in all of those examples, I showed you like a weekly scale, and I think weekly is really good for giving your general like day-to-day life some structure. But let's talk about some more and different options. So first is a semester schedule, and this is great for finding trends in your semester. You can identify busy weeks and plan ahead. Unfortunately, you don't have as much detail about what's happening each day or week, but I really love a semester calendar for going through your syllabi and pulling out when everything's due, because you can see these trends, right? Like in this one, I have an ISEM reflection due every single Thursday. That's consistent, I can see it. There might be some weeks that have a lot more stuff due, right? So we've got a final draft of something due on top of reflections, on top of homework, and all of these different things. So I want to plan ahead for that. I can also see when exams are going to be so that I can kind of give myself a week's notice to start studying for them. So getting a semester schedule and just pinning it somewhere where you can see it can help give you that like idea of structure. Next is a weekly schedule. So this has more detail than a semester schedule, obviously, and it's easier to see where you have free time within the day, but it can get really overwhelming if you've got like a lot to get done that day. Another downside is that you can't easily see what's coming up next. So what I encourage folks to do is have a combo, right? Like I want to have both that semester schedule and a weekly schedule, so I can plan for what's going to happen soon, but I can also get a good feel for what I'm doing that week. And then the last one we're going to talk about in general is just a daily schedule. So a daily schedule can be as simple as a to-do list, right? It doesn't have to be planned out hour by hour. But this is a great way to give your day some structure, especially if you're taking mostly online classes, because it's really easy to just kind of go, all right, I have stuff to do, but I don't really know where to start. This can get a little overwhelming if you schedule too many things in one day. So what I encourage folks to do is don't have more than like 4 big things that need to get done in a day. Otherwise, it can be really hard to hold yourself and get through that actual to-do list. So another way to handle time management is action planning. And we discussed this in goal setting, right? Our actualizing the steps part is all about creating an action plan. So as a reminder, an action plan is a way of taking a large task and breaking it up into smaller, more manageable pieces. Your action plan can be big projects, homework assignments, study sessions, or really anything else. And when making an action plan, it's important to include intermediate deadlines because these deadlines can help prevent procrastination in the long run. So I'm going to go through a couple of examples of different types of action plans so we can get a feel for them. So first is action planning your study plan. So let's say you have a biology test coming up and you're trying to give yourself some structure for going through the material to make sure you feel confident about it. So we're going to study chapter 6 of biology by February 26th. So first I'm going to skim the chapter. I'm going to make sure I attend those Zoom lectures and take some detailed notes on those days. Then I'm going to condense all of my important terms onto one page. I'm going to try out some practice problems, and I'm going to write 2 to 3 sentence summaries for each section of notes. Now, what's great about this action plan is that it's very clear about what I'm going to do. And what I like about action planning a study plan is that you get a sense of just how much material it is that you need to cover. So occasionally we'll put off studying for an exam until like 2 days beforehand. And we're like, well, I've only got 2 chapters of material. How much time could it take? But then when you look at those 2 chapters of material, you realize that it's a lot of stuff to cover. So taking a little bit of time to just plan out how exactly you're going to tackle all of your studying well in advance can help you from getting really overwhelmed when it gets closer to the test date. Next, we're going to action plan a paper. So let's say we have a paper due on the 28th. We're going to find 3 sources in our first step. Then we're going to develop our thesis statement. We're going to write an extended outline. We're going to have 1,000 words, then 2,500, then 4,000. Then we're going to check out the writing center with a rough draft. We're going to edit and review, and then we're going to submit the paper. So a couple of things to notice about this action plan is 1, it incorporates all of the help and resources that we want to use. So it can be hard to convince yourself to go to the writing center or to go access some other resources just because it's another place you have to go or it's an appointment you have to make. But taking some time to include it into your action plan will really help motivate you to use those resources. Next, the step size here is pretty small on some of these steps. And that's a really great thing to do if you're struggling to find the motivation to start a project. So maybe it's a paper that you have to write for a class that you're not necessarily very thrilled about. Breaking it down into really small steps can help you get through that, because oftentimes we'll put it off. We'll go into procrastination mode when we aren't able or when we aren't feeling that project, if we just aren't a fan of it. So if I'm only holding myself to finding 3 sources, that's a lot more doable than just telling myself to start the paper, right? Now I have some word count things there of like, okay, by this first day, I'm only going to write 1,000 words, and then I'm going to write more and more and more. If that 1,000 words is a bit too much for one go, no worries, break it down into a smaller step. Hold yourself to 500 words or 100 words or even just the first sentence. Whatever step size it takes to get you started on your project is the important thing. It doesn't matter how small it is, because you can take a bunch of small steps and still get the whole thing done. All right, and the final action plan we're going to talk about is action planning your day. And this is really just a structured to-do list. So on the 24th of February, I'm going to check my email and respond to it from 8 to 9 a.m. And this is really important, especially right now when a lot of things are online. You want to make sure that you're taking some time out of your day to check your email to see if you have any announcements or meeting requests or anything like that from your instructors. I encourage folks to check it at least 3 times a day, once in the morning, once in the afternoon, and once before the end of the day. And this just makes sure that you don't miss any important announcements. My next step is to attend my Zoom lecture, just a reminder for myself. And then I'm going to take some time to summarize those notes right after the lecture while it's still fresh in my memory and before I get bored and go do something else. Then I'm going to take a break because I've earned it. Next, I'm going to take some notes on slides and recorded lectures for my Flynn class at 1 p.m. And once I'm done with that, I'll take a break until 3, and then from 3 to 5, I'm going to work on homework for a little bit. So if you ever are sitting down, you're like, man, I don't even know where to start. Try just coming up with a little bit of a plan for yourself that day. Now we're going to talk a little bit about time management on the super small scale, right? So we've talked about how to time manage your day. Let's talk about how to time manage those like hours that you're studying. So we're going to talk about the Pomodoro technique, which is a way to organize how you work. And just like an action plan, you're taking a task and breaking it into smaller chunks. So the way that this works is for each 25 minutes of intense focus, so this means putting all distractions away, you give yourself a 5-minute break. And you go back and forth like that 4 times until you've worked for about 100 minutes total, and then you take a longer 30-minute break. Now, there are a lot of really awesome things about the Pomodoro technique. And one of the things that I appreciate is that it can be really hard to commit to studying for an hour straight, especially if it's material that you're not really excited about. It's a lot easier to commit to just 25 minutes. Second, I get distracted easily. So if I'm only holding myself to 25 minutes with the promise of a break afterwards, it's a lot easier for me to do. Now, one thing to keep in mind about this is that it's flexible. So if 25 minutes is too long to ask of yourself, totally fine. Take it down to 15 minutes and follow it with a 3-minute break, whatever size of step you need. Now, I've had some students who are like, 25 minutes isn't long enough for me to accomplish anything. That's also fine. Take it to 40 minutes or 45 minutes and follow that with a 15-minute break. But just incorporating that sort of back and forth structure so that you don't get burned out in the long run. Now, if you're like working on something and you really get in the groove of things and you're going and it's like 2 hours knocked out and you're feeling great, that's awesome. You don't have to study in this way, but it is a really great way to study, especially if you struggle to find that motivation or if you feel really exhausted or burnt out after a long study session. So we have our schedule, we have our method of how we're going to tackle things. Another aspect of time management is finding the place to actually work. So you want to make sure that you have a dedicated space for working on schoolwork, and it can add consistency to your day-to-day schedule, especially if it's online. So I encourage folks to try avoiding in your bed when possible. So, find a desk, go to the library, go to a space on campus that you can, and work from there. However, if you have to work on your bed, which I realize is the case for some folks, try working at the end of the bed that you don't normally sleep on. And what that does is just kind of create some separation from where you rest and where you work. So, like, don't lay down, sit up at the end of your bed with your stuff around you and like work that way. Next, make sure to keep things like notebooks, writing utensils, headphones, charging cords, all of that stuff nearby, just because if you're working really hard and then suddenly your computer's at 10%, it can really throw off your groove to have to like get up and search for your charging cord. So just have it nearby so you can like keep going without interruption. Next, make sure you minimize distractions while you're working through lecture materials or homework. You can use headphones or background music to kind of block out noise distractions, and then talk to your family or roommates about times when you need a quieter environment to work in. So if you have a really big test coming up and your like roommates in your apartment or something are just like really talkative and fun and great, let them know ahead of time, like, hey, love you guys, but on Wednesday, can we have it a little bit quieter? I have a really big test on Thursday and I want to make sure I'm giving myself a good place to work in. And if you address that beforehand, then you're less likely to run into any sort of like conflict or arguments. Okay, we got our space set up. We got our schedule set up. The next component of time management is getting organized. So you want to make sure that you find a good space and you want to create a workspace that is both physically and digitally efficient. So make sure you establish an organizational system that is clear and consistent with file names, and then arrange files and papers in a way that makes sense to you. So here's an example of how to do that. You can start with like the folder for your class, right? So I would make a folder for each class that I'm in. And then within that, you make folders for all of the different types of assignments. And within each of those, you have rough drafts and final drafts. And then you make sure that the files that you're labeling are really clear. So I recommend putting your last name and then what the thing actually is, and possibly a date. This helps you find things really quickly, and this helps your instructor sort things as well. Additionally, it's just really professional. So it's a good habit to get into. So later when you're sending off resumes or CVs or anything like that, having that really nice, clear, and consistent file organization shows potential employers that like, hey, I'm a cool and organized person. And then taking a little bit of time to do all of this organization right now can help make finding things faster in the long run. So this is especially true where a lot of stuff is turned in online. Like we don't really turn in physical copies of things anymore. So making sure that you can always find your assignments quickly helps you if you're getting close to a deadline. So we've gone through all of this stuff. We're feeling really set up for success. We've got our amazing schedule in whatever format we like. We have our space set up. How do we handle things going wrong? How do we handle interruptions that pop up throughout the day or throughout our semester? So there are a couple of things that I want you to keep in mind when it comes to time management. One, priorities change. Maybe your top priority this semester was like your English 257 class. You were like, this is going to be the hardest class. This is my #1 priority. And then surprise, surprise, like your art and architecture swoops in and it's like, just kidding, I'm gonna be the most difficult class. So you might have to rearrange your priorities in just the amount of time that you're spending in each class. Second, life happens, right? So this kind of plays into our priorities changing, but you may have thought like, okay, this academic year, this 2020, 2021 is gonna be amazing and I'm going to get on the dean's list and all of this stuff. And then a pandemic happened. So how do we kind of adapt our schedule and our priorities to make sure that we can still take care of ourselves and handle all of the things that life throws at us? With that, a good plan can always be improved. You may have like a really stellar schedule, but stuff happens, right? Maybe your car breaks down, maybe your friend really needs you one evening. So you want to make sure that you have some flexibility built in so that you can improve that schedule and adapt it as needed. Things don't always go according to plan, right? Like this is kind of the thing that I keep saying. But some small examples of that are you might have extra time. So maybe there was a paper that you blocked out like 4 hours to work on and it only took you 2. What are you going to do with that extra 2 hours? Maybe it's a good idea to take a break. Or maybe you have another project that you want to get a little bit ahead on so that you aren't as stressed in the long run. You might also have less time. Maybe there was a project that you blocked out 2 hours for and it took you 5. Now you have to look back at your schedule and try and rearrange things so you can still accomplish everything. So making sure that you have that flexibility built in can really help with that. And finally, other people might need your help, right? Like, I don't like to think that academics are totally separate from life. They aren't. They're closely connected. So you're still a human with human needs, with friends and family and all sorts of people who might need you. So recognize that it's totally okay if you have to set something aside for a little bit to go help someone out. But also keep in mind that, like you can set boundaries for yourself and you can tell folks like, hey, I'd love to come help you move, but I can only help you for 2 hours today because I have an exam coming up and I really need to study for it. So kind of setting those boundaries for yourself while still helping those people is really important. And finally, remember to breathe. So if things get out of whack, if your plan goes awry, take a few seconds, take a couple deep breaths, go back to your schedule, go back to your action plan, adjust, and keep moving forward. Alrighty, that is all that I have for you today. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. Let me know if you have any questions, and I will talk to you all later. Bye.